So Claire, between you and I am going to make sure that you have the rights to become the presenter. If you could just confirm that you got those rights and go ahead and put things up on the screen, we'll get started in 1 minute. Looks good, Claire.
Okay, good.
Okay, well, a good day to everyone. We're going to go ahead and proceed with the webinar since it's the top of the hour. We want to let you know that this is we have had the largest number of registrations and, as I can see, participants, attendees in this webinar that we've had in a series of webinars that we've held over approximately the last 2 years. This marks either the 7th or the 8th webinar. So we're glad and grateful for your interest on this very important topic that we're simply calling rollout of version 9.0 and beyond. My name is Holmes, and I'm responsible for sales. Our guest and presenter will be Claire Grant, who is our Chief Technology Officer. Once the presentations are finished, we will have a question and answer session, and that you can use the chat box on, and we can read your questions that way and answer them over the audio connection. But before we begin with Claire, I would like to make a few comments regarding a bit of a business update from VSI. So just a couple of things. Some of this is really reminders, and some of this is a bit new to many of you. So first of all, just a reminder for all OpenVMS customers and all OpenVMS users, there are some critical dates coming in the near. First of all, the HPE version 8.4 standard support ends on December 31st of this year. If you recall, we announced last November that VSI had acquired all of the HPE support renewal contracts for OpenVMS, whether they were HPE versions or VSI versions. So this is an important date to keep in mind to make sure that your OpenVMS environment remains supported to the degree that you wish it to be supported, and that we have already been talking to many, in fact, hundreds of customers around the globe to make sure that they have either made the transfer to VSI licenses or renewed their version 8.4 standard support. And there's still some time to do that, of course, and we're happy to work with you as well. Another important data point is that according to the HPE roadmap and recent conversations with HPE, the i6 server sales, the hardware server sales, ends December 31st of this year, which is also an important date for obvious reasons. And then there are also some other changes going on. Specifically, HPE has, and many OpenVMS customers still remain on i2 servers. The hardware support for those servers is also, from standard support standpoint, is going to be coming to an end also in the near future. We suggest that you check with your HPE representative to confirm the dates of when those servers will end standard support. and make sure that you have the correct information from them. We know that there are a couple of different dates depending upon the model numbers that you have, so please verify that. But all of these three events are important for all OpenVMS customers. And again, it's our intent here at VSI to make sure that you understand the options available to you. And we would be happy to work with you in the planning of in the execution of those options as you see fit. The second thing that we wanted to talk about from a business update is we have a new subscription model, which we're very excited about. And in many ways, this ties into the earlier point about the many changes going on for OpenVMS customers. This new subscription model will allow it for customers to ease into the VSI licenses, because if you're familiar with a subscription, you get both the licensing and the support as a bundled package, and there's not a one-time upfront expense for the license costs themselves. So it is an easier way to get involved and make that transfer and transition to VSI licenses. And for many organizations, we understand this is a OpEx versus CapEx type of issue. And we also believe that this subscription model will lend itself to the OpEx side of things, which may be easier for customers to work with. It's also important to note that that VSI is continuing to grow, and that we've added additional engineering teams and engineering talent, I should say, developer talent, and that continues on today. We've also added some additional sales and marketing resources. We know that more and more customers want to talk to us and work through details, and we're happy to do that. I'm pleased to announce that in Europe, we have Adam Hoff Nielsen has been on board for over 2.5 months. Adam is based out of Copenhagen. And so if you've not had a chance to communicate with him yet, I'm sure that opportunity will arise. We're also pleased to let you know that our professional services team continued to expand, and we hired Dave Sullivan as our North American professional services manager, excuse me, on January 1st. So we're delighted to have both Adam and Dave as part of the team in order to provide good communication and in terms of helping you and assisting you with anything regarding your OpenVMS environment, as well as anything else for that matter. The last item that I wanted to touch on has to do with a new community licensing program. I have been with VSI almost 3 years, and everywhere I've had a chance to talk to people or go to events, I am always asked about the hobbyist licenses. So I'm pleased to let you know that we are introducing a new community license program, which will be beginning in the fall of 2020. As many of you are aware, HPE allowed those on the HPE hobbyist license program to make one additional request or purchase of the HPE version of OpenVMS hobbyist licenses towards the end of last year. And with that program winding down, we have gone ahead and decided to proceed with a similar program called the Community Licensing Program. The content available will be basically for integrity users and for alpha users. There will not be anything for VAX users, no VAX licenses. There will be some requirements placed upon the user in terms of agreeing to our end user license agreement, our EULA, and also the stipulation that these are not to be used for commercial gain or for commercial use. And there will also be some limitations in terms of what the users get, but we believe that will be robust enough for you to do the things that you wish to do. So again, we're delighted to announce this program and delighted to be working with you for all of these changes that are going on, and we're excited. We appreciate you. We appreciate the business that we received, and the good news is that we are continuing to grow. And we also, regarding the community license, we do anticipate the same for x86. So with that, I would like to now turn the time over to Mr. Claire Grant. Claire, many of you know, has a legacy in terms of his experience with OpenVMS. He is one of the original employees of VSI, VMS Software. He led and was on the team that led the VAX to Alpha port, the Alpha to Itanium port, and now for VSI, he's leading the effort to port to x86. So with that, I'd like to turn the time over to Claire. Claire, take it away.
Okay, let's go back to the agenda here just for a second. I'm assuming everybody can hear me at this point.
Sounds good.
Pleasure to be with everybody today. This has been a pretty exciting week for us in the last few days here. Some of the things I'll say today, you've probably heard me say before. That's a good sign because it will reflect the fact that the strategy hasn't changed, the way we've worked hasn't changed, and things seem to be pretty much moving along according to the way we'd like them. So I'll say a few words about virtual machines, a little bit about the overall x86 rollout plan, a little bit about the details that are in version 9.0 right now and what will be in the real near future, and how do we get from here to version 9.2, which is still a pretty long road. So first about virtual machines. Since the very beginning of the company, we have placed an emphasis on virtual machines. This is not really our doing alone. This is what so many customers have told us that they want. My second bullet here is a direct quote of at least a handful of people I've talked to, and a paraphrased quote of many, many more. And I'm sure Terry and his team can attest to this as a continuing theme that we hear from customers. So our focus has been on VirtualBox, KVM, and VMware to come soon. VirtualBox has been our main debugging environment, but we've also worked a lot with KVM at this point. Another point I'd like to make here is I hear and I read, oh, they're virtualizing VMS. That can be a very misleading comment. What I'd like to say is we're enhancing VMS to run on selected virtual machine guests, which is really what we do for a new hardware platform. And from the operating system's point of view, a virtual machine is just another platform to VMS. If there is platform-specific code, it gets loaded during startup. But that's a very small piece of the overall picture of the operating system. And all virtual machine hypervisors are different, just like all hardware platforms are different. And two easy examples, just because you run on VirtualBox does not mean that you run on VMware. And likewise, just because you run on i4s does not mean you run on i6s. And now that I think of it, that second half of that last bullet is one of the crucial reasons behind how VSI got created. So virtual machine specific to certain guests. Also, I want to emphasize that we're not getting out of direct hardware support, but it will be a little different in the future than it ever has been in the past. We can't possibly test the myriad of platforms in the x86 world. So our plan is, at least for starters, we'll pick a couple HPE and Dell servers, some Intel and some AMD processors. But what we do ourselves will be fairly limited. But we fully encourage customers to try other platforms. We know they will anyway. And we assume there will be problems. I mean, you just don't put the system on another platform and bang, it just comes up and works. It doesn't happen. So we're more than willing to have people do this, and we'll work with you. And there will be problems, absolutely, during the boot phase. But once you get the system up and running, it should be pretty smooth on most anything. So the gist of all of this is what we support for direct hardware running is going to be largely dependent on what our customers want. So here is the plan, which hasn't changed. Adding some details this time that I haven't talked about before, probably. There's a cross tools kit. It's been out there a long while. And if you follow our website, you will have seen up there for the past month or so that we were going to ship to our first customer on May 15th. That was last Friday, and we did so. And that customer is Software Concepts International. And I'm sure by the end of the day, you can go to their website and read all about what they've done. A couple of details that just struck me. I sent out the announcement message to SCI in the middle of the afternoon. Just as we would do any release, directions on access to the website, directions on various things, documentation, etc. Less than 2 hours later, I got a mail message back that they have downloaded, they're booting, they're running, and I had a screenshot of their system up and running. Even for the expertise that they have at SCI, I thought this was astounding and very pleasing. Because it wasn't so much that VMS was up and running, it was that the whole process of what we put together to get things downloaded and in place on their system and up and running, that was very good to hear as well. So what we have in mind at the moment, by the end of this month, I'd like to add 3 or 4 more customers and 5 more here, and kind of a monthly cadence. A little while ago, someone asked me, how many people do you think will be running by the end of the summer? I hadn't really thought about that too much. So I said, well, let's pick the end of the year. And I said, 20 sounds too few, but 100 sounds too many. So if we keep up a cadence of 5 or so a month, that'll mean 40 or so by the end of the year. If that number is somewhere between, I don't know, 20 and 60, that feels pretty good to me right now. But it will still take a lot of work to get there, but it's a good goal. And continuing from where we are today, we need to add some native tools. Cross Tools Kit will still be available for a while, but eventually, once we get native tools in place, we won't be able to support both the cross tools and the native tools. 9.1 will be a little different in that we'll make that available to lots of people, not just a selected few. And to get to that point, we really have to get most of the system components in place. And 9.2 will be a full production release, complete operating environment. And I think my last bullet is pretty important. And I think that from today all the way to getting to 9.2, we will provide a fairly regular, steady set of updates along the way. You won't just get an update and then 6 months later, you'll get the next one. I don't know that we can keep a monthly cadence, but I'd like to think that it will be something like that. Because as we add more as we add more components to the system, it will be such that there will be more people be able to get their applications started and running. Recap of the Cross Tools Kit. Been out there for well over a year now. The first version had 3 compilers, the ones that we use to build VMS itself. The next update added Fortran. The next update added Pascal. COBOL and BASIC are in testing right now. I don't know that both of them will make it by the end of June, but I think at least one of them will. So I would say 2 months from now, they both should be in place. We've had a number of customers providing feedback on the Cross Tools Kit. There will not be a Cross Tools Kit for alpha. What that means is until we get to 9.1, you have to have an Itanium system on which to do your compiling and linking. We have a list of probably 50 more customers now, and we know exactly the layered products they need and the compilers they need. So we are doing things to help facilitate as many people as we can as early as possible. And what we've done in the past was, for example, when we added Fortran to the CrossTools kit, we sent out a message to all the people who are currently using the CrossTools kit, plus those we knew that were waiting for Fortran. And we'll probably keep that up in terms of layered products and the other two compilers as we go along. Another note is that there will not be a C++ or a Java on the CrossTools kit. They just won't happen until we get to native on 9.1. So initial version 9 content. This is pretty much as the system is today. Yes, it'll be rough around the edges. We know that. Everybody knows that. But we wouldn't be putting something out there that we didn't think was going to be really useful for people to get going. So it's less than perfect. It's less than complete, but hopefully it will give people a start. And that second bullet you've heard me say many times, we've really tried to do this in the order in which people tell us they can be productive. Initial support for VirtualBox, and we're adding KVM and VMware as we go along. I was tempted to add KVM right now, but in a couple of weeks, we'll probably make that a possibility for early users. Everything in terms of the internal operating system functions are present. There's nothing missing that's crucial in the guts of the kernel. And a lot of the things that you normally associate with running the system and managing the system, I've listed a number of them here. These are all functioning. Thing at the moment is there are no layered products in the sense of what you would get in the normal layered product kit or open source kits. So that's where we are today, and a lot of this you'll see in a few minutes. So how do we move on? As I said, I want to make this as regular as we can in getting new stuff out. And until we get quite a ways down the road, each new kit is going to be just a complete new installation. We're not going to have what I'll call an update procedure to what you're currently running. That's just a whole new world that we don't need to get into just yet. And we'll get more kits out as layered products appear, other compilers appear, open source kits are ready. So I'm continuing to emphasize this will be some sort of pulse in terms of getting things out as they become available. And each time we'll offer it to more users, and eventually more will be everyone. But I think we need to keep a fairly tight rein on the number of people early going. And we've had some people tell us, even though when they filled out the questionnaire, they said, well, I need X, Y, and Z. They're more than happy to get something just to get their environment set up and to get started. So even though we can't give them what they need to really test all their application environment, we'll get some things out to people even before that. Now, eventually, we have to turn this 9.0 into 9.1, and that will happen when we get pretty much the entire complement of layered products and open source kits available. None of what I just said should be of particular new news, but I think it's important that we've been able to stick to the plan. So a little bit more about where we are today. This is a list you've seen me put up before. I originally created it because it seemed to indicate a number of things that should tell you that there's a lot of the underlying system in place and working. One of the things that did not make it yet, and that's the symbolic debugger that I haven't read down at the bottom. We're just not there yet, and I have no predictions on when we will be, but it's a high priority. The next two up, POSIX and TCP/IP, they're almost there, and they will be shortly, we assume at this point. And the rest of the things, most of them you'll see in a few minutes in the demo. And here's a list of components that are not available yet. And it's not so much that the reality is there's a priority in what we do, and these are the ones that have not yet been high priority. And I think I've shown most of this list before as well. I think one of the major things we have to get going next is SMP. I mean, we just haven't been there yet, but I know it will open a few floodgates that will test us for a bit. But in terms of getting to our next available kit, it may not make the next one, but we need to get there fairly soon. And I think most of the rest you've seen before. The privileged applications, people who write drivers and access internal routines, people know who they are. They know at a major release they're going to be subject to some changes. And we'll have some documentation for people who either write device drivers or manage page tables, because there are vast differences in x86. And my usual floating point note down on the bottom. You won't have VAX floating point support until 9.1. And VAX floating point support in C++ is going to be a big question mark in the future. And if that really is detrimental to people, we need to know about it fairly soon. I wanted to pick out a few things here just as what is really going to look different to you on x86. Well, the biggest thing of all is probably the boot manager itself, and you'll see that in a few minutes. All different than anything you've seen before on VMS. We have this thing called the dump kernel now. It is more or less invisible, but I want to show you an example of where you might see it referenced and how it is used. If you haven't read about MDS mitigation, I encourage you to do so. And we will have whoops, what did I do here? And we will have a message come out at the beginning when system comes up, and to tell you that we are implementing and exercising the suggested algorithms to help with this situation in the processor. Another thing that may become apparent to people is that prior to this release, if you have a code segment that you've indicated as write and execute, we just did it. We decided to print out a warning message just to alert you that you better know what you're doing, because you're giving yourself enough rope to hang yourself. On the surface of it, something being writable and executable doesn't sound very good. We're not going to disallow it, but we'll give you a little bit of a warning just in case you aren't aware of it. And you will see a number of places where 64-bit code addresses will appear in maps and displays that may jump out at you. There will be some other differences, but not many. At the programming level, I want to just touch on a couple things here. This first bullet, depending on the language used, it's possible to force your code and data to be, I'll say, quote unquote, close to each other in the address space. Generally, this is not going to fly on x86 because we, by default, are putting all code in 64-bit space. And data will be in 32-bit space unless you really do something to make it otherwise. If this is a problem for you, we've given you a way to keep doing things the way it has always been done. And we've employed this in ourselves a few times. In the working set, over the years, you could do a lock working set on pieces of your address space. That also has problems on x86. And you really need to do a lock of the entire image, and we'll have documentation about this. So I want to say a little bit about the boot manager. We won't go into the details right here, but this, if you're a system manager or you're running VirtualBox on your PC, you want to become familiar with this because it will be brand new, and this is the way the system will come up on all platforms. And we'll go into the details of this in a few minutes. I've talked about this many times before, but it's always worth emphasizing. VMS will always boot from a memory disk. That's a file, and it contains images needed to get VMS up through the early part of the boot path. This happens regardless of whether you're talking about a physical disk, a virtual disk, a network download. The memory disk file is loaded and booted first. This makes booting VMS across all platforms uniform. It saves us a lot of work in a number of ways, and it's just goodness in terms of the customer experience and our ability to maintain the system. Partway up through the boot path, we switch from the memory disk to the actual system disk that you run on when the system is up and fully running. A minor note in that there are no longer what we call boot drivers. I mean, if you think about the way the system has to come up from the very beginning, we have to read things off a disk way before there's a file system. And we always had a special case of boot drivers needing to use something we call the primitive file system prior to the system being up far enough to use the real file system. We no longer need those at all, because the only boot device, quote unquote, that we boot from is the memory disk. And the only real, what I would call a boot driver, is the memory disk driver itself. This eliminates a lot of work on our part, makes the system much more maintainable. And if you think about it in the terms of work we do, every device that you think you might want to boot from required a boot driver in the past. Think of what that would be like to maintain in the world of x86. We've eliminated all of that. One side effect of that is, since there are no longer any boot drivers, is the advent of the dump kernel. So what happens today is that when the system first comes up, the boot manager does, in fact, a couple of things. It loads and starts the primary kernel. Now, the primary kernel is VMS that you've known forever. The entire system, you bring it up. But the boot manager also loads into memory, but does not start the dump kernel. It's sitting there waiting to be used when necessary. So when a system crash occurs, the primary kernel goes down, just like you would imagine, but the boot manager recognizes this special situation, and it boots the dump kernel. Remember, it's already sitting there in memory. The dump kernel boots, gathers data, writes the crash dump, and halts. And at this point, the boot manager again recognizes what just happened, and it goes back and loads and starts the dump kernel and boots, loads and starts the primary kernel and dumps the boot kernel. Back to square one, so to speak. So when the system comes up as you normally see it, primary kernel gets loaded and started, the dump kernel is there waiting to be used. So what is this thing? It's really a subset of the primary kernel. It comes up to the point of where you can think of startup.com in a sense. It's really a user process, and therefore it can use all of the I/O and drivers of the file system and everything else that's available to VMS. This will be somewhat invisible, but I hope I can show you in a demo where you might see it pop up when something happens. So where do we go from where we are today? I hope in the end of May, that's where I'm looking at a next set of an update. TCP/IP will be ready. Of course, we'll be improving the quality. Should be available on KVM, and there may be the standard installation procedure. So those are the real goals to get to it by the end of May. If we can add a couple of layered product components, if we can add a few more of the system components, that will be great. But the end of May won't be a lot different than it is today, other than hopefully TCP/IP and KVM. And eventually we have to start moving towards getting everything that's not in that initial 9.0 component list that we saw in a few slides ago. In the compilers, yes, we have to complete BASIC and COBOL, get them added to the Cross Tools kit. I'm going to guess that within a couple of months they'll both be there. But the bigger deal is LLVM itself, our new backend code generator. The one we're using today is the one we started with, so that's pretty out of date at this point. So we need to update LLVM to a more recent release. We need to port that to VMS, and we need to get it integrated into our compilers. And this is the driving force between native compilers on the x86 platform itself, and porting Clang, which will be the basis for our C++ on x86. So there's still a lot of work to be done in the compiler world. And we have to build and test all of the layered products and all of the open source kits. And it will be just continuous overall system stress testing and regression testing. So while we've done a lot and we have a lot to show for it today, we still have a long ways to go. Along the way, we'll be responding to what people tell us from the use of 9.1 and 9.0. But the real focus between 9.1 and 9.2 is stability and performance. This is based on 9.1 should have pretty much the complete set of VMS environment ready in terms of open source and layered products and compilers. So moving from 9.1 to 9.2 really isn't a functional move as much as it is the quality move and the performance move. And we have the standard things that you would suspect of any organization doing work like this: regression tests, stress tests, adding more live customers. We have a lot of performance measurement tools in VMS, some of which we're using now, and like we haven't touched compiler optimization yet, but we'll be moving towards this. So I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, that moving from 9.1 to 9.2 isn't going to be an add of new capabilities. It's going to be just making the system better. So I'd like to do a short demo. First of all, I'd like to look at the VirtualBox guest configuration and see if I can show you how to relate what you see in that to what eventually gets run in VMS when it comes up. We'll look a little bit at the boot manager itself. A couple things I like to point out during startup because they will kind of reinforce what you see in the configuration. Opcom, audit server, and they play a particular role during startup, and they're easy to demonstrate a few things. We have a batch system. I'll do a few DCL commands, but I'm sure you don't want to get bored watching me type. We'll do one of our stress tests and use monitor to watch it run. We'll run UETP, that's the user environment test package that has been with VMS since its very beginning. Good load generator on the system. And if nothing else happens, we'll force a crash dump so you can see how the dump kernel works. I want to say one thing before I start the demo here. There's absolutely nothing special about the software I'm running. It is exactly the VirtualBox appliance that we put on the network for SCI to download. There's no difference. There's also nothing special about me doing this on my MacBook Pro. It wouldn't be any different if you were doing it on your PC. There's also nothing special about me doing it other than I probably know some commands not to type. So I hope you're looking at a split screen here with two terminal emulator windows open.
We can see it, Claire.
Thank you, Jerry. So let's start with the VirtualBox manager itself. Yes, I have a lot of VirtualBox guests defined, but the only one that matters right now is this one that's blue highlighted that ends in XFKJ. So let's look at the settings, the definition of what this guest has to offer. So we've defined this to be 6 gigabytes and just one CPU. As I mentioned, we're not in the SMP mode yet. Serial ports, COM1, this is what you normally think of as the console line. And we have a second port that we can log into a regular terminal line. The most interesting piece here is probably the storage. Now remember, this started out as a VirtualBox appliance that I just imported into VirtualBox. These first 3 items, the VDI files, these are the disks that we configured in the appliance ourselves and made it available. So you start out with those for free. And those 3 VDI disks, they turn into DKA 0, DKA 100, and DKA 200. The one on the bottom, as you can imagine, is mine. And that's a disk I created. I put files on it that I need added to the system, and I attach that to this VirtualBox guest. So the things to look out for that are significant here: memory, CPU, ports, and storage. So that's what we have. And let's just start this thing running. We'll get this out of the way. Okay. So what I've done in this window over here, in my terminal emulator window, I've connected to port 2023, which, as you remember when we looked at the VirtualBox configuration, was my serial port line. So here's the boot manager. Up here in the top section, above the yellow line where I'm waving my pointer, this is pretty much for developers. You can indicate which components of the system you'd like extra messages to come out from. And you also can indicate things like having the debugger loaded, having special system messages come out as part of debugging. I'm not going to stop at any breakpoints, and well, let's do this. I hadn't thought about this. Let's stop at sysboot, and we can just look at that. So I'll add that. So we're ready to go. Actually, we don't need to see the boot manager anymore. So first of all, you can notice that it indicates that the primary kernel is booting, and we're booting on VirtualBox. And now we've stopped in sysboot just like you always do. And you can change parameters. Let's look at something here. I show this one just because those bits include the indicator that we're doing a crash dump, not to the system disk, but to another disk, which we call dump off system disk. Otherwise, you can do the normal things you do in sysboot. Believe it or not, I did that on purpose, just to show you that security features that are necessary there are working. But let's go back and look at a couple things during startup here. In particular, here's the MDS message that I mentioned, and it indicates the type of processor and the type of algorithm, I should say, being used. But let's look at these right here. Back when we looked at the VirtualBox configuration, we had those 3 VDI files. The system disk is DKA0, but the next 2 are indicated here. This one has a name of page, and this one has the name of user, and they are indeed DKA 100 and DKA 200. And that's what got defined in the VirtualBox appliance that we made available on the network. So let's move down here. This is the usual set of things that get started by VMS on the way up. As the system expands into more components, there'll be a few more things here, but this is what is there today and should look very familiar to most anyone at this point. Let's see. Here is a way to Opcom and all of the things that it's supposed to do are working, and the security part is also working. If you notice what I did, I said for the audit server to start a new journal file. So the audit event is there's going to be a final entry made in some file, and there'll be a new log file opened, version 10. And second event is here is the first entry being entered in the new file, and the log file into the previous one being closed. Just to give you an indication of all those interworkings of the audit server, Opcom, and the security features are all in place and working. Let's see, let's try this, show device. So now you can see here, we have DKA 0, 100, and 200, as we noticed in both the VirtualBox configuration information and in the VMS startup output. What you notice is the DK3 here. That's my disk, but we don't automatically start that in the appliance that we supply. So let's do that. We're going to execute this little command here, and this will add my personal disk, which I created, to the configuration. And you can now see the DK100, and that's my disk. So one of the interesting things that if you start with the VirtualBox appliance, yes, we start out with a configured 3 disks. You can add your others, but there's nothing cast in concrete about the original appliance definition. You can go to the VirtualBox manager. You can change the number of CPUs, the amount of memory, add your own disks. If our port numbers didn't reflect what you need, you can change those. So we give you a starting point, but don't think that is also the end point. Another thing that's useful for debugging that I can easily show you, I think. We start out by defining system batch. These are the 2 batch queues. I've booted this VirtualBox guest a number of times, and I create my own queues. They're there. So when you can do something like this, and you'll see the standard information. One of the interesting debugging tools that's very useful, and if you don't happen to be familiar with it, it's called set file watch. Set watch file. I always get that backwards. So I have a symbol for this, and I'd like to show you what it does. Just it's a really good debugging tool. We use it all the time. Now let's go back to this command again. Okay, you got the same output that you did before, this line right here. But notice that in addition to talking to the queue manager, it had to go off and look up something in the rights database. So half of what you see in this output right here comes from the queue manager. The other half comes from the rights database. A very useful tool if you're looking at file system related problems and you're not sure if all of the files that you need to access are being accessed. Nothing magical about directory. I just want to do this to emphasize that anything related to the file system, copy, rename, delete, purge, all those things, the file system is completely fully active. Oh, and we have an editor. We only have one editor right now, and that's EDT. TPU is in the works and may happen fairly soon. Just to show you that this is real. You know, it's EDT. You can do stuff. If you have a command procedure that needs to know the platform that you're running on, you probably noticed this. So if you're looking for CPU type that you're running on, this is what you'll see, x86 under 64. And if you're looking for platform type, this was what you would see for VirtualBox. I get these questions all the time. What am I going to get in return for getting SYI components? Let's see. Most everything in terms of the auditor is in place as you would normally think it would be. I don't think there's anything different here. We try not to make outputs different just for the heck of it. I think this should look pretty much like you would see something on Itanium or Alpha. But the internals of a lot of images and objects, given that we use ELF format, are pretty much like Itanium to begin with. Nothing special there. Another tool you'll need starting out with application development. Many of you probably run SDA on the running system. Things like, you can't have a demo without the loaded image list. So these are all of the images that VMS loads as the system comes up. And we'll go more. Now, what's interesting, or let's say special about this one, is these here that I've highlighted. These are all debugging images that we load for our own debugging purposes. You would not see those on the standard system, but you might be asked to have them loaded if we were trying to pursue a problem and it could only be reproduced on your system. And here's the remainder. So this is the complete list of everything that VMS loads on the way up in order to provide necessary components in a running system. Remember, we had in our VirtualBox configuration GUI, we had a 6 GB system defined. There's that. You will see lots of things now with S2 in front of them. Remember, the default for code is to be running in S2 space, 64-bit space. So this list is a lot bigger than what you will see on Itanium. And one more. My favorite whipping boy. So I'm just going through this to show you that as a tool for helping you to get started debugging your applications, things are mostly there in terms of looking at the running system. A couple of miscellaneous things.
Claire, I wanted to know we have many people who have many questions, so I want to make sure we allow time for that too.
Yep. So this is what let's exercise the system a little here. Oops. For the most part, things having to do with monitor are working. And we're going to go over to our COM port 2 that we defined in our configuration. And we'll run a stress test that we have. Now, this is originally created to exercise the page file, and particularly filling it up and making sure the system doesn't keel over. So while you can see the message that comes out here, yes, we are indeed filling it, and that's what we're trying to do. We're making sure that things survive and continue to run. So on the one hand, this test is specifically designed to exercise filling up the page file. Don't brush aside the fact that a huge amount of the underlying normal paging mechanisms have to work in order to get this file. So we'll just run that for a couple of seconds, but you can see these numbers will increase in a hurry here. And this really is doing a lot of work in terms of memory management. So one more thing over here. I often describe to people that while it's very exciting when we first start and get things up and running, you can run programs, it's equally as hard to stop things in terms of running down address spaces, process slots, and all those sorts of things. So this is not only a good exerciser of the page file, getting rid of these things in a hurry also is a good exerciser of a lot of things. Okay, one more thing here, and we'll move to questions. Let's do and we'll start up another system tester. I mentioned GBT once, BTP once before. Yeah, so we'll start up a whole bunch of stuff here. And just again, to show you that the tools needed to start the debugging of your processes running on the system, this is a good indicator of who's taking up all the CPU cycles. And remember, all of this is being done right here with just one CPU, which on the one hand doesn't exercise a lot of SMP things, but on the other hand, it will get you to a lot of boundary conditions when you're only running on one. Okay, one more thing here, since I want to demonstrate the dump kernel to you. We are going to force the system to crash. So note right here that the dump kernel has now been booting and is running. And the other thing we looked at, the dump off system disk was set. So we're writing the crash dump out to a file on DKA1, remembering the system disk was DKA0. So all of the mechanisms of being able to gather information, whether it's a real live crash or a forced crash, all of the things needed to do with the dump kernel and going back and automatically restarting the system, as you'll see happen in a second here. So I'm trying to point out as much as anything that the pieces that are needed initially to really start debugging applications, pretty much everything is there. And we're back to the dump kernel, and we're back to the boot manager already. And if we were to let it rip again, and you would normally come right back up and run again. So I hope that gives you at least a brief picture of where we are today. A lot of things are there. There are still a lot of things missing, but in terms of being able to get started with applications development and get things over to your system, I think we're in fairly good shape to get people off the ground. And we'll just bring this back up. And I'll turn it back over to Terry in a second. I don't want to put seriously big plugs in here for Oracle, but I'm telling you, VirtualBox was a godsend for us. We would not be anywhere near where we are today without it.
So, Claire, I think it's safe to say that the attendees have been absolutely delighted and thrilled with what you have presented today. They're all still on, and there's a lot of them. And okay. There really are. And that's great. That's fantastic.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So we'll get this back up here.
Yep. And then why don't we go ahead and jump right into a few questions, because there are a lot of them as well. And for those attendees who can, we're going to stay on this webinar as long as possible to answer as many, if not all, of the questions as possible. So your schedule is your schedule, but we're going to stay on as long as possible. So there's a few questions regarding some really some commercial things, but we'll skip those while we have Claire, and let's jump right into a few other things here. Claire, regarding hypervisors, do you want to make a comment? There's a question about Microsoft Hyper-V. Do you want to make a comment in general?
Well, it's on our radar, but it's fourth on our list, to be perfectly honest. I mean, VirtualBox, KVM, VMware are clearly the top three. And yes, Hyper-V is out there, but it will be behind the other three.
Next question from Steve. When will you publish actual hardware requirements for customers wanting to take the 9.1 EAK?
I will say that before we get to 9.1, we will have booted on at least 2 or 3 hardware platforms, and we'll make that available. As I said, don't think that's the end of the world just because we've only tried 3. We're more than happy to have someone else try something else, but we will publish the 2 or 3 that we have booted on by the time we get to 9.1.
Okay, great. From John, do you foresee ever running OpenVMS in the cloud, VMware on AWS, Azure, or any scenario within a public cloud environment?
Well, the only real thing for us is if we run on VMware or VirtualBox or KVM or anything else that someone offers as a cloud possibility, I mean, it doesn't really matter to us. I mean, if we run on VMware and someone makes a VMware instance available to you, that's good enough for us. We don't care about the underlying platform in any way.
And from
by the way, let me finish that a little bit. I didn't say this before, but SCI, in fact, is running on a Linux instance in the Oracle Cloud.
Okay, interesting. Any news on a VSI-supported Ada compiler, or Itanium or x86?
It hurts me to say this, but nope, no news.
Okay. From Gary, what is the easiest way for a systems administrator to determine if an application is using VAX FP? But it can be answered later if you wish.
Yeah, write that down and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, okay, good. I'm going to another list here. A couple of lists, there's so many questions. From Pear, is debug functional?
Debug as in the symbolic debugger? The answer is no, not yet. We have Delta, but that's all at the moment.
Okay. From Zia, in the release cycle, where are we with DECnet and TCP/IP?
Well, TCP/IP is imminent, and I mean within a handful of days. DECnet we haven't built yet. So DECnet is down the line, but we know that a number of people, when they filled out the questionnaire, said they needed DECnet. So we know that it's in the priority list.
Kind of a follow-up question is the TCP/IP based on Multinet or the old HPE version? I think the answer
This is new stack.
Yep. Which file system OpenVMS 9.x will rely on? Is it still RMS?
Well, the file system as we ship now will be the file system that has been there for many years. Same with RMS. The new file system, GPS2, will come along at some point in the future. But as we start out on x86, it will be the XQP just as it has been.
There's a few questions about the roadmap. Do you want to make a comment about 9.1 and 9.2 projected releases? I know this is always an interesting issue, an important issue for customers.
Sure. I think the roadmap today says 9.1 by the end of this year. That is going to be a real stretch. I doubt if we make it by the end of this year. It'll be a handful of months into next year. Now, it also, what I'm talking about there is the completed, fully, functional all components 9.1. As I said before, we won't go from nothing to all of a sudden having everything. That's why I want to keep on some sort of a pulse of releases so we can keep adding components incrementally along the way.
Here's a question regarding a commitment already being made from Oracle to port to RDB. I'll just make a quick comment on that. I think many of you know that Oracle support has been with us since day one of our existence back in 2014. We have a very close working relationship with them, both from a business and technical standpoint. Claire, do you want to make an additional comment regarding that?
Well, we exchange mail with the engineers at Oracle very frequently. They're one of our biggest contributors to comments on the cross tools. And we just had a meeting with them a few days ago, in fact. And we meet with them on a regular basis, team-wide basis, and we have individual conversations frequently. We've been working with them closely, as Terry said, since the very beginning. And I can't comment on their schedule.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's important that if you want to get that question answered, please go to Oracle and ask them that question, just to get it from the source. Okay, here's another question. Is the procedure calling standard for x86 available yet? In particular, does OpenVMS require frame pointers? Quote, or parentheses, they are optional on Linux and unused on Windows.
Well, the easiest answer here is when we make the kits available and you get the information about how to download and so forth, one of the pieces of documentation that we provide is the calling standard.
And a follow-up question, our application creates machine code, maps it into memory, and executes it using dynamic procedure registration on Alpha. Will this be available? And if so, when will you publish the spec?
We do have to write something in particular there, and I can't give you a direct answer right at the moment, but yes, it's on our radar, and we know we have to write a little bit.
When will LT colon devices be available?
You'll have to write that one down. I don't know the answer.
Okay. We'll get back to you on that one. Is there a template file available for this?
This is the previous question.
Yeah, I don't think it is. So we'll have to get back. That's a prior question that the same person asked. So we'll have to get back to them on that.
Okay. Yeah, anything regarding documentation, we'll definitely get back to you as soon as we can.
Yeah, so actually it looks like the prior question had to do with version 8.4 Itanium customers migrating to VM on x86 environment. And so the later question is a template file available for this?
I, I think we need more details in the question.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. If someone joined a few minutes late, will this run on Fusion or do I have to install VB?
In fact, we started out with Fusion ourselves.
In sysboot, particularly on virtualized environments, it would be useful to output the config memory devices. I'm not sure there's a question in there, but just a statement if you want to
Well,
comment.
that's interesting. Yeah, definitely take a note on that one. I like that one.
Okay. From Alan, are all lexical function exists?
Yes.
Okay. Jeff, what would be the challenges in having OpenVMS 9.0 as a container in Docker, for example?
Um, I don't really know, but I mean, I don't think there's anything particular about VMS itself, but yeah, I don't know. I do know what containers are, but I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. From Jerry, what about backups, physical tapes, fiber connects available on hosts, disk save sets, cloud storage, etc.?
Backup, yes. And now you have to think about what the virtual box or KVM or whatever guest will provide for you. But yes, we need to do a deeper dive into the types of things that this question is asking about.
I'm sure this question is on a lot of people's mind. It will be available for VMware. Claire, would you like to speak to the status of
I
VMware?
don't know, but I can tell you that we're working with VMware, but we also have VMware is different than VirtualBox and KVM, of course, because there's a company that's trying to make money here. We have to have a conversation with VMware about, can we actually put our product into field test on VMware without them having blessed us as a official guest? We need to have that conversation. And a lot of the answer to this question may depend on their answer. But in terms of, are we working with it? Yes. There's more to the answer to that question than just, does it work?
Yeah. Or when it's going to be available. Okay. What about plans for clusters? Where will sharing a disk be performed for disks like shared system disks?
Yeah, we just haven't turned on clusters yet, but that is high on the list of the next things to happen.
Regarding product availability on VSI OpenVMS version 9.2, do you have information regarding support of Oracle? I think we've kind of talked about that on VSI OpenVMS version 9.2. Okay, sorry, I think we've already addressed that.
That's an Oracle question.
Yeah. Will TCP/IP support SFTP and SSH?
Yes.
HPE adopted a very restricted policy with respect to patches as opposed to functional improvements. This compares unfavorably with Microsoft, Mac, etc. Does VSI intend to keep this policy in VSI VMS? Good question.
That's probably more of a question for Terry and others than it is for me.
Yeah, I think we will make note of that, Tom. Thank you. ACMS expected when?
Yeah, it's one of those layered products that we know a number of people are looking for. And again, as I said, as we move towards 9.1, we'll try to get things out as quickly as possible that we know the most people are looking for. So can I give you an exact date? No.
This is a little bit more of a commercial question, but there's so many questions that I don't want to ignore it. My client is having the OpenVMS 8.3 on Itanium. What changes, updates to be required? So let me address a couple of the more business questions that have been asked. So VSI will continue to support HPE version 8.4 under standard support until the end of this calendar year, December 31st, as mentioned. We will also support prior HPE versions under what HPE would call a PVS, or what we simply call L1, L2 support. So for 8.3 today, we support many customers on 8.3 with support only for L1, L2 support only, which is mainly phone support, possibility of workarounds, things like this. For 8.4, and of course all VSI versions during this year, we fully support, including any new patch kits that are released, and if issues or cases need to be raised to engineering. Starting January 1 of next year, version 8.4 ends, standard support ends on January 1st, 2021, per the HPE roadmap. So part of the decisions OpenVMS customers should look to make is how do they want to handle that upcoming event, and do they want to, many have talked to us already, hundreds have talked to us already about converting to VSI licenses, etc., which again goes back to another option for customers, which is our our subscription licensing model. Let's continue on. We've got several more. So someone asked about the CSLG program. We have a CSLG program. It will likely continue on to x86. We've already talked about Hyper-V. Here's a question from Mark Dominique. You have FTP. Will you give a S3 ASW command? We have to use a gateway Linux Solaris server to get backup dumps to AWS S3.
Good one to write down. We'll get back to you.
Okay. I think you've already addressed this, but let's make sure, Claire. What time frame, version can we expect application level build tools? C compiler, symbolic debugger, support for MMS, CMS?
Well, there are a couple of questions in there. And if you're asking about native compilers on 9.1, that's a goodly handful of months away from here. So native compilers on 9.1, that's not imminent. In terms of the cross tools, we'll have what we have there today plus BASIC and COBOL, but the cross tools will never have a C++. Now, in terms of the other things that were mentioned, they are in the layered product list that we'll get to them as they seem to be necessary and needed by the most number of customers.
Okay, great, thank you. Is there support for SAN from a VM, parentheses, DG driver, not DK driver, or only from hardware?
This is one of those many configuration questions that we probably haven't fully researched yet, and we know we need to write something about this.
Can you please clarify what version of OpenVMS will be stable for a customer to run a production business environment, version 9.1 or 9.2? The answer is 9.2. Yeah.
9.1 you should still think of as a field test.
Are there any documents available to us regarding memory management for drivers?
Yes, we will have something that we'll publish, because if anyone uses internal routines directly, there are things you will need to know about what's different. And yes, we will publish something on memory management, as we will for device drivers.
Okay, another question. I would love to try running OpenVMS on a VM on my laptop using VBox. Is it possible to share? Point me for the installable, please.
Take his name, we'll get back to him.
Okay. Another question about RDB being tested. I think we've addressed that. Will Pascal functions that work with 32-bit pointers, i.e. address, have to have the code changed to use the 64-bit version?
I believe the answer is you don't have to change anything, but we can check with the compiler experts to be sure.
What is the status of SMG, $, and other RTL routines?
Just another RTL. I mean, we use SMG functions all the time.
Question from Brian, ability to cluster OpenVMS VAX 7.3 with x86 OpenVMS.
The answer of being in a cluster with VAX is almost certainly going to be no.
Will clustering support mixed environments? Will we be able
as
to
in
cluster
Alpha, Artanium, and x86? Yes.
I believe that's what's being asked. Yes. Yes. We continue to do spin locks as the primary synchronization mechanism for SMP.
Nothing's changing on that front.
Someone's asked, just curious, WebEx attendance today. I'll just say it's in the multiple hundreds. It's not 1,000, but it's in the hundreds. So very good. Ian's asking a question that's really, Claire, I don't know if you know the answer to this, any additional version 8.4 update patch kits this year. So I think we can get Ian that answer separately.
Yep.
Has InterSystems showed any interest in this?
No.
No, they have not. Max CPUs in 9.2.
Well, that number really isn't changing. 64.
Okay. Okay, that we finished off one chat box. Now we're going to the second. Okay, I think this has been addressed about delivery. Okay, a question about 9.0, maximum volume capacity on OpenVMS 9.0.
No different than current versions.
Okay. Question about the presentation. Yes, it will be available on our website in approximately 48, 72 hours. That will go up on our webinar landing page. So give it until, I would say, Friday. Question about version 9.0 release date. I think Claire addressed that. This question was earlier on. Question about TCP/IP. I think that's been addressed. From Christian, will the VirtualBox KVM VMware versions include hypervisor specific tools? Example, the VirtualBox guest editions, or how is the driver support handled?
We have thought about that. I don't know the answer yet, but we know it's something we'll get requests about. So we'll have to address this some way.
Follow-up question, which file systems will be supported on OpenVMS on x86?
Well, you'll have the current file system, and the new file system is being worked on when it comes about. But right now, you will get the same file system that's available in 8. whatever.
Yeah, another question on timing about clustering and shadowing. When will that be part of X?
As I showed in that list of what's not in 9.0 at the moment, we know there's an obvious list there of clustering, shadowing, SMP, reserve memory. Those are the things that we will be addressing next. So what you should see is announcements coming out during the next handful of months that will say, there's a new version available and it now includes X, Y, Z. So that's why I'd like to keep things on a bit of a pulse in terms of getting 2 or 3 things out each time we make them available. I don't want to wait 6 months and say, all of a sudden, here's 10 new things.
Okay, here's a question. This is an interesting question. Talking about performance comparison between platforms.
No idea. We haven't even thought about it yet.
Well, yeah, I mean that's certainly a logical question to ask.
Of course.
Yeah, yeah.
We haven't done optimization of the compilers. We've done no real measuring. There's just not enough of the complete system there yet to make it worth our time yet.
We made a request to increase RMS database record size over 32K limit. Will this be addressed in version 9.2?
Nothing changed in the RMS front.
VMware is the only option for me. Is the memory disk just another disk somehow? And will you provide a generic VMS to boot from?
I think there's a combination of questions in there,
Yeah.
maybe even a misunderstanding. We will boot on VMware just like we boot on anything else.
Any plans to containerize OpenVMS?
Not at the moment.
Have you done the experiment of migrating COBOL programs from VAX to virtualized environments?
No, we basically don't deal with VAX at all.
Yeah. My client is having the OpenVMS 8.3 XXX on Titanium. What changes? Okay, I think we've addressed that. Target for macro 32 compiler.
That's been in the cross tool since day one.
Okay. How could I participate with you in the improvement of the product or be able to have the test to these applications prior to a total migration? I guess maybe it might start with getting a questionnaire filled out.
Yes, you took the words right out of my mouth. Send him the questionnaire.
Yeah. Here's some, yep, again, the webinar is being recorded, will be on the website in full, including a download of all the slides. Question from Robert, DIS will still mostly ODS-2, question mark?
Well, we support ODS2 and ODS5.
Have you had conversations with any third-party vendors, Oracle, TIP, RV, any indication whether they are aligning their roadmaps accordingly? Well, I think the short answer to that is yes. We've referenced a few of them here, but the answer is yes. We'd have to get into a lot more detail about the specific ISV partners on that. Okay, this is a long one. I had to do the migration from VAX to Integrity, and to use COBOL, we used VEST to convert programs. However, it was necessary to recompile some programs already in the system. When trying to implement 8.4.1H1, memory dump was present, was necessary to recompile again. Will it be necessary to recompile again to go virtualized environment?
Well, see, here's the virtual environment has nothing to do with it. You will have to recompile to move to x86. Oh, and seemed to be implicit in one of those questions a little while ago. We have no tie vest equivalent for x86.
Okay, can we present the disks, parenthesis LUN, close parenthesis from storage?
Yes, normal storage things will work.
How much more portable is VMS now, or will it be once this project is complete?
Well, here's my usual answer to that. I don't mean to be flip, but when we ported from VAX to Alpha, I mean, we turned a 1,000-pound gorilla into a 950-pound gorilla. And the next port, we probably cut off a few more pounds, and the next one a few more pounds. Is it more portable than it was before? Probably yes, a little bit in the terms of you get a universal back-end code generator in LLVM. However, you're still talking about a monstrosity, no matter how you cut it.
Okay, are you expecting any new customer base with x86? What is the marketing strategy to get new customers for OpenVMS? I guess I'll take that one. So just in a quick summary, and then Claire, you can obviously comment. Quick summary on that. In some ways, we are expecting some additional customers. Our strategy, though, is to hopefully gain what's called a bigger share of wallet from within the existing customer base. As many of you are aware, OpenVMS today may be a portion of someone's IT environment. And by moving to x86, we truly hope that customers will know and understand and recognize the benefits of OpenVMS as they have for quite some time. Stability, availability, and going to x86 will encourage current customers to expand that share of wallet in their IT environment. Beyond that, we also are looking to become more of a solutions provider. In some cases, that may mean actually not necessarily being involved in OpenVMS, but that's the core of what we do in order to help you work in whatever way you wish to with your OpenVMS environment, which is one reason why we have expanded some of the services that we offer and also are trying to do more from the communication side. So I don't know if you want to make any other comments about that.
No, well said.
Okay. Will a VMS guest support basic hypervisor functions like shutdowns initiated by the hypervisor? VMware. Oh, sorry. Can you take that question?
Well, they're just sitting there as a guest. I mean, whatever the host has for guest tools, I assume that they will work on us like they will anybody else.
I think we've already addressed questions about the new stack. Are you thinking of supporting any new graphics cards?
No.
Some images were vested from VAX and again from Alpha to Itanium. Will there be something like that from Itanium to x86?
No, we have no vest tools in the plan at the moment. We did a lot of work on one, but it got put on the shelf, and I don't see it coming back. So right now, there's no plan for a vest tool on x86.
Unless such tools exist for VMS or VMS supports. Oops. Okay, these questions keep coming in very fast. And it keeps moving my screen here. Let's see. Okay, sorry, let me repeat that. Unless such tools exist for VMS or VMS supports ACPI shutdowns, the hypervisor cannot shut down VMS. Looks like more of a statement.
Okay.
Okay. It looks like we've at least tried to answer the majority of the questions. Again, they keep coming in. Okay, what is from Edgar? What is VSI strategy now that you entered the world of virtualization? Will they? I guess it means we have alliances with SAP, Oracle, or some software partner, or is just continuing to give home to proprietary developments? That's a great question. I'm not sure I have the appropriate answer to that right now as we sit here in this webinar. Claire, do you have any comments?
Could you repeat it, please?
Yeah, sure. Basically, it's now that we've entered the world of virtualization, do we have any alliances or maybe plans for alliances with SAP, Escada, Oracle, or other software partners? Or are we just planning on continuing to give kind of the home base proprietary developments?
I think the answer is that VMS will always be a proprietary system.
But at the same time, as I mentioned in an earlier question, we aim to expand our horizons at some point beyond OpenVMS and again become that solutions provider. Customers take us to where our future is, and that's where we want to be, where the customers and what the customers want. So that's really important that you that we say that. Yeah, and again, I think the other comment about is we have a number of excellent ISV partners today. And not only so not only from customers do we understand what their interests are, but we also gain insight into customers from our ISV partners. And together that really drives our longer term and even medium term strategy. So there'll be more on this in the future. Okay, how does initial performance of this platform compare to i6? Better, worse, equal?
Don't know, we haven't measured it.
Okay. Will VMS survive a vMotion in VMware? We're running on Sharon on VMware to host VMS, and vMotion always crashes VMS.
I don't actually think this is a VMS question. It's more of the host, but I don't know the answer.
Okay, I think we'll take this as the last question since we have gone over by quite a bit. Will there be any effort to get VMS into the universities again? Well, the answer is yes. In fact, the answer is we are in universities today. We have a college licensing program or educational licensing program. Admittedly, we need to do more work on this, but to expand it rather than just licensing programs for educational institutions, we need to make sure that those educational institutions are helping to train up and teach and educate about a new generation of open VMSers. We recognize that. That's a very important part of the mix here. I'm going to go back for a moment and check the other list to see if we've got other things that have come in. I think we're good. So again,
Terry, I'd like to say one more thing.
Claire, go ahead, please. Of course.
This is one of those incredible days where I get to be the mouthpiece for an amazingly talented set of engineers. Even if you're sitting in your home office staring at the wall, they deserve a round of applause.
Well put, Claire, and I will also tell you, I've not read them, but I have, on this webinar, we've received several messages offering congratulations to you and to the team for for the efforts that's been put in for quite some time, for a number of years. And I'll make sure that you have a chance to see that.
Well, I'll accept that on behalf of everyone.
Well, very, very. As I said that, I'm getting more notices, more chat messages. Congratulations, and everyone's clapping now. Big kudos, etc.
Well,
We want to.
I hope today everybody got to see that it's real, it's alive. We're not done yet, but I think you can see now that it will be.
So again, we want to thank all of our customers and partners, all of you who have participated in this webinar. We've done a lot. We've got a long way to go, and without you, we can't do it. And again, thank you again. We'll try to address any other questions that we're looking at on an offline basis. And again, look forward to the next time we connect. We will continue. Another one. Up to date.